Ancient Greece, the birthplace of philosophy, democracy, and wisdom. We admire Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle as giants of thought. But behind this glory lies a darker truth. A truth often ignored. Greek philosophy wasn't just about wisdom. It was also about power and who deserved it. Let's uncover the dark side of ancient philosophy. In Athens, women were denied education, denied freedom, denied voice. They could not vote, they could not own property, they could not speak in assemblies. Meanwhile, philosophers, those who spoke of justice, rarely questioned this injustice. Aristotle, the great thinker, called women imperfect men. For him, women were naturally inferior, destined to be ruled. Plato was different. In his Republic, he imagined women as guardians too. But even Plato's idea was never reality in Athens. In Sparta, women had more freedom, training, and property rights. But Sparta was the exception, not the rule. For most of Greece, women's lives were confined to the home. They were taught silence, obedience, and submission. Philosophy claimed to search for truth. But did it ignore half the truth, the lives of women? This is the hidden hypocrisy of ancient Greece. A society of thinkers built on silence. Do we still admire them without question? Or should we confront the uncomfortable truth? This is just the beginning of the story. Next, how slavery became the foundation of philosophy itself. Behind every philosopher, there were slaves working in silence. Ancient Greece was built on slavery. Millions lived without freedom. Slaves farmed the land, mined silver, and built temples. Even great philosophers accepted slavery as natural. Aristotle called some people the natural slaves born to serve. He argued they lacked the rational mind of free men. This was not just opinion, it justified the entire system. Philosophy became a tool to keep power where it already was. Slaves could be educated, even skilled, but never free. Socrates himself was served by slaves in his household. Yet, Socrates rarely challenged slavery in his dialogues. The same man who questioned everything never questioned this. Plato's Academy, the first great school of philosophy, also relied on slaves. They copied manuscripts, prepared lessons, and served students. Without slavery, philosophy may never have flourished. But not all philosophers agreed. The Stoics said, "A slave may be chained in body, but free in soul." Epictetus, one of the greatest Stoics, was himself a slave. He taught, freedom is not outside, it begins within. This was a rare voice of hope in a world built on bondage. Still, society never changed. Slavery continued for centuries. Even Rome inherited this system from Greece. Philosophy spoke of justice, but lived on injustice. This contradiction shaped the entire ancient world. And it leads us with a question: can wisdom be true if built on slavery? Greek philosophers often spoke of virtue and simplicity. But many lived in comfort, supported by wealth and slaves. Plato founded the academy, a place of learning for elites. Ordinary people, and especially women, were excluded. Philosophy claimed to seek universal truth. But its doors were closed to most of society. Socrates was different. He lived simply, owning almost nothing. He refused wealth, refused escape, even when condemned to death. But not all were like him. Aristotle became tutor to Alexander the Great. This gave him power, prestige, and influence across empires. He taught moderation, yet enjoyed privilege. Plato preached justice, yet supported rule by philosopher kings. This meant only a few wise men deserved power. It was justice for the elite. Meanwhile, cynics like Diogenes called them out. He lived in a barrel, rejecting money, status, and luxury. Diogenes exposed the hypocrisy of philosophers. Where others taught moderation, he practiced total rejection. He mocked Plato, calling him arrogant and false. When Alexander offered him riches, Diogenes replied, "Stand out of my sunlight." This insult made him famous for rejecting power itself. Diogenes showed one truth: philosophy without action is hypocrisy. But his radical life was an exception, not the norm. So what was philosophy really about? Truth or power? By now, we've seen how women were excluded from philosophy, but another group faced an even harsher reality: slaves. Slavery was everywhere in ancient Greece. From farms to households, slaves formed the backbone of society. Shockingly, many great philosophers didn't challenge slavery. Instead, they tried to justify it with reason. Aristotle argued that some people are natural slaves, born to obey, while others are born to rule. He claimed that slaves lacked rational capacity, making them dependent on masters to guide their lives. This idea gave intellectual cover to oppression, turning human cruelty into a so-called natural law. Plato too accepted slavery as part of his ideal society, though he focused more on hierarchy than freedom. For most philosophers, liberty was a privilege of the few, not a right for all. But there were exceptions. The cynics, like Diogenes, mocked social status and claimed that freedom comes from living simply. Diogenes himself said, "The only true slave is the one ruled by desire." He turned slavery into a metaphor for inner weakness. The Stoics also challenged slavery, though in a different way. Epictetus, once a slave, taught that true freedom comes from the mind. He said, "No man is free who is not master of himself," a message that gave hope to those who had no external freedom. Still, Stoics never demanded an end to slavery. They accepted it as a social reality, focusing instead on inner resilience. This raises a painful truth. Even the wisest thinkers sometimes turned away from injustice when it was convenient. Slavery remained untouched, because without it, the Greek economy and even philosophy schools could not survive. And so, while the world praises Greece for democracy and wisdom, we often forget it rested on the backs of the enslaved. This is the dark contradiction of Greek thought: freedom for some, silence for others. But not everyone accepted this fate. Slave revolts, though rare, shook society and exposed the hypocrisy of Greek values. Some philosophers hinted at this injustice, but none had the courage to openly demand abolition. So the question remains, can wisdom be considered pure when it ignores suffering at its doorstep? Greek philosophy gave us logic, ethics, and reason, but it also gave us excuses for domination. Perhaps the true lesson is not to worship philosophers, but to challenge their blind spots. Because every age has its own blind spots, and future generations will judge us the same way. Philosophy's greatness lies not in its perfection, but in its ability to confront uncomfortable truths. And in the next part, we'll ask, what does this legacy of power and oppression mean for us today? By the 4th century BCE, slavery wasn't questioned. It was the backbone of Athens and Sparta alike. Philosophers, instead of condemning it, explained why it should exist. Aristotle argued that slaves lacked the rational soul to govern themselves. He even called them animated tools, useful but without dignity. This shocking view became philosophy's justification for inequality. Plato, in his Republic, mentions slaves only in passing, accepting their existence as normal. To him, they weren't citizens, not philosophers, just part of the city's machinery. The Cynics, like Diogenes, lived as if free from society, yet never challenged slavery outright. Their philosophy of inner freedom gave comfort, but no solution to chains. The Stoics came closest. They taught that all humans share divine reason. Epictetus, once a slave, embodied this truth. His strength was in the mind, not circumstance. Yet even the Stoics stopped short of demanding abolition. They saw slavery as fate, not injustice. This silence reveals philosophy's double face, seeking truth but protecting power. Slaves built the temples, tilled the land, fought in wars, yet remained invisible in philosophy. Even Athenian democracy, which prided itself on freedom, was built on their backs. This contradiction is staggering. Freedom for some, chains for others. Philosophy dreamed of justice, but justice excluded the majority. The truth is, philosophy often served the ruling class more than universal freedom. Still, tiny sparks of equality survived, in Stoic words, in Cynic actions, in rare voices like Hipparchia. But those sparks never became fire. The chains of slavery remained unbroken. This raises a powerful question. Can philosophy ever be neutral in the face of injustice? The Greeks gave us logic, ethics, and political theory, yet also gave us excuses for slavery. Their brilliance and blindness are both part of their legacy. And this legacy shaped not only ancient Greece, but the laws and morals of the Western world. In the next part, we'll see how philosophy's ideas of inequality entered Roman law and beyond. When Greece fell under Rome, philosophy didn't disappear. It evolved and shaped Roman law. Roman thinkers admired Aristotle and Plato, adopting their views on hierarchy. Just like in Greece, Roman society was built on slavery, millions of people bound in chains. The legal system of Rome defined slaves not as people, but as property. Owners could buy, sell, punish, or even kill slaves with little consequence. Philosophy's silence on slavery helped justify this cruelty. Even Stoicism, popular among Roman elites, accepted slavery as part of the natural order. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, wrote about inner freedom but ruled over countless slaves. This contradiction defined the Roman world: wisdom in words, oppression in practice. Women too were legally bound, controlled by fathers, then husbands. Even wealthy Roman women had limited rights compared to men. The idea of natural inferiority, borrowed from Greek thinkers, became law in Rome. Roman jurists cited Aristotle's hierarchy as evidence that inequality was logical and eternal. This was philosophy's dark gift, turning prejudice into law. And yet, within Rome, resistance always existed. The Stoic idea of universal reason inspired some to question slavery. But it was not enough to end the system. Rome needed slave labor to survive. Slave revolts like that of Spartacus shook Rome, but were brutally crushed. After each rebellion, Rome tightened its grip, defending slavery with law and philosophy. The dream of equality was pushed aside. Philosophy bowed to power. Yet cracks appeared. Some Christian thinkers, influenced by Stoicism, spoke of human souls as equal before God. This new idea would one day challenge Rome's old philosophy, But in the ancient world, inequality remained law, and philosophy often served the powerful. This raises a haunting truth. Wisdom can inspire freedom or justify oppression. As Rome declined, Greek philosophy didn't vanish, it was absorbed into Christian thought. Early Christian thinkers admired Plato's idea of the soul and Aristotle's logic. But with this came a problem. Greek ideas about inequality also survived. Women, for example, were still seen as weaker, needing male guidance. The Church often repeated Aristotle's claim that women lacked full rational capacity. Even when Christianity taught that all souls were equal before God, society remained unequal. Slavery also continued, though it slowly transformed into serfdom. Serfs were not legally owned like slaves, but they were bound to their lords, unable to leave freely. This system was justified using both scripture and ancient philosophy. The medieval worldview saw hierarchy as natural: God above, kings below him, peasants and women at the bottom. This reflected Aristotle's natural order, now baptized into Christian doctrine. The Church taught that women must obey husbands, just as subjects must obey kings. Medieval law often treated women as property, controlled by fathers and husbands. This made ancient prejudices even stronger, backed now by both philosophy and religion. But resistance never vanished. Mystics, rebels, and thinkers questioned inequality. Some women found influence in convents, where they could study, write, and teach. Figures like Hildegard of Bingen challenged the silence, proving women could be intellectual leaders. Still, these were exceptions. The majority of women and peasants lived under control. The Middle Ages preserved philosophy, but often twisted it to defend authority. This is the hidden legacy of Greek thought, not only wisdom, but also systems of oppression. Even as new schools of philosophy were born, Aristotle remained the master of those who know. His views on women and slaves were repeated in universities for centuries. Philosophy's blind spots became cultural truths, shaping medieval society. But seeds of change were quietly growing, ideas that would later spark the Renaissance. And in Now, we'll see how rediscovering Greek philosophy during the Renaissance challenged and sometimes reinforced inequality. But not all philosophers were silent. A few voices began to question the morality of slavery and inequality. Some asked, if philosophy seeks truth, can truth exist alongside injustice? Yet these doubts were rare whispers in a sea of acceptance. For women, the silence was even deeper, their stories erased almost completely. Ancient Greece gave us brilliant ideas of logic, ethics, and politics. But it also gave us the legacy of exclusion and inequality. Power, unseen but ever present, shaped every idea. Who had the time to sit and debate? Only those free from survival struggles. This raises a troubling question. Was philosophy really universal, or just for the privileged? Imagine a Greece where women and slaves could debate too. Their wisdom, sadly, was hidden, never written, never preserved. Aristotle, the great teacher, justified slavery as natural. His reasoning: some were born to command, others to obey. But was this philosophy, or simply the defense of power? Even Socrates, famous for questioning, left this injustice unquestioned. Plato dreamed of justice, but his justice excluded many. Diogenes mocked society, yet even he mocked women. Cynics claimed freedom, but not for everyone. In truth, Greek philosophy was both a light and a shadow. Light of reason, ethics, and wisdom. Shadow of exclusion, silence, and inequality. Today, we celebrate their brilliance. But we must also face their blind spots. To understand philosophy's dark side is not to reject it, but to learn from it and build a more inclusive future. We began with the glory of ancient Greece, the birthplace of philosophy. We saw the brilliance of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. But we also uncovered the shadows they left behind. Women whose voices were silenced. Slaves whose labor carried the weight of the Greek world. Power, the invisible force shaping who could speak and who could not. This was the paradox of philosophy, teaching freedom while ignoring the unfree. Teaching justice while excluding those who needed it most. And teaching truth while accepting silence. Yet from these shadows we can learn. Philosophy is not frozen in the past, it is alive today. And today it belongs to all of us. The questions remain the same. What is truth? What is justice? What is freedom? But the answers must come from every voice, not just the privileged few. If Greek philosophy gave us the light of reason, then we must expand that light to every corner it once ignored. The brilliance of philosophy lies not in its perfection, but in our courage to face its flaws. To honor philosophy, we must carry both its wisdom and its warnings. For philosophy is not just history, it is our guide for the future. The Greeks began the journey, but we must continue it with more voices, more justice, more truth. A philosophy not of exclusion, but of inclusion. A philosophy not of silence, but of dialogue. This is the legacy we must build, the light beyond the shadows of Greece.